Hello, everyone, and in this episode of The Eclectic Life, I'm going to discuss some ideas for reforming our political systems. Everyone knows that U.S. politics have become super dysfunctional, but how do we climb out of this massive hole we've dug for ourselves? These ideas came to me the other day in the car. There was yet another doom and gloom news segment on the radio about some wacky politician saying or doing some ridiculous thing. I found myself thinking, can't anyone fix this? What would I do to fix this? How can we make things better? And the ideas kept popping into my head. I decided to jot these down and share my thoughts with you. Many of these have already been mentioned before, but I feel like it's important for us to keep them in mind, to keep talking about them, and to keep demanding action on them. Without that pressure, nothing will change. I'm a big believer in putting things out there in the universe. These ideas need to become part of the collective consciousness so that we can manifest them into something tangible. If the solution is out there, we can grab it and make something happen. We know what to do, and this is the path that will move us forward. Without further ado, these are 10 reform ideas that would really make a difference, in no particular order. Okay, number 1. No more lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices. The more I think about this, the more I feel like it's almost too much like a monarchy, which is what arguably the United States moved away from to actually become the United States. So I'm uncomfortable with the idea of someone being appointed to a job rather than elected to that job and then being able to keep it for the rest of their life. That just doesn't sit well with me. And I think because it's a lifetime appointment, there's a lack of accountability for the justices, and that would help explain some of the less than ethical behavior that we've been seeing as of lately. So I do think the lifetime appointment perhaps encourages them to not act professionally or even unethically. I think the world is also changing at such a fast-paced rate that we really need a steady supply of new judges to keep pace with that. And it would be good to see some younger judges in there who may be more in tune with current events, world events, and just being able to keep up with some of these rapid changes that we're seeing. So, in order for this to work, I was thinking rather than having a lifetime appointment, we could do something like reduce their term down to perhaps 10-year segments. So, it would be a single 10-year term. A decade is long enough to sit on a bench and to preside over cases. And then once your 10 years is up, that's it, you're out. So, one term and done. And we could either keep this the way that it is now, as far as the president would continue to appoint the justice if their 10 years runs out during his or her term, or we could change it to allow the people to actually be able to vote for Supreme Court justices. So, two possible ways to do that. But whatever we do, I don't want to see any kind of campaigning for the position because the Supreme Court is not supposed to be partisan or politicized. So I would like for it to be highly professional, nonpartisan, and we would kind of treat it the way that we do now for judges in local elections. We don't really see a ton of campaigning. They're not really out there. There's usually just a little bit of factual material put out to kind of educate voters on, who the judge is, what are some of the kinds of cases they've sat on. But there really isn't any like campaigning or fundraising or really raising like a lot of money the way there is with the presidency. So I would like for this to stay very non-politicized. Okay, number 2, get rid of the Electoral College and just use the popular vote. The Electoral College is undemocratic and makes people feel like their voice and their vote doesn't matter. States with more Electoral College points get more attention at the expense of voters in other states. So, an example of this would be California having 54 Electoral College votes or points versus a state like Nebraska who only has 4. That's 54 versus 4. Your vote actually carries more weight if you are from a high point state. And this goes against the idea of democracy and everyone's vote being of equal value. Going by the popular vote instead is more straightforward, fair, and encourages politicians to care about voters' concerns everywhere, since it all counts for the same amount. So if you're a politician, you could campaign anywhere. You don't have to go to those high point states because since you're using the popular vote now, you want to win no matter what state you're in because it all counts for the same. Remember, one person, one voice, one vote, period. Number 3, mandatory psychological evaluation for all political positions. This includes the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court. These are positions that last for years, so we need people in these positions who are of sound mind with the ability to think rationally. And the way I'm thinking this would work is the person would be evaluated by a panel of mental health professionals, like let's say 5, and they have to get the okay from 3 out of the 5 in order to assume the position. If there really is a mental health crisis in America, then statistically speaking, there should be political officials who are not well and in need of treatment. Why should politicians get a free pass to be as wacky and dysfunctional as they please at the expense of the country? It's hypocrisy to claim that Americans have widespread societal mental health problems, but somehow that doesn't apply to any of our political leaders. These positions are too important to just let anyone through the door. There are millions of other people who can potentially fill those positions if the person is deemed unfit for duty. And again, this is not meant to shame anyone, but we need to identify problems and be able to refer people to treatment so that they can get the help that they need. And then maybe later in the future, after they've received treatment and they're more stable, feeling better, they've dealt with some of their issues, then they can turn around and run for office again if they choose. Number 4, allow for universal early in-person voting, mail-in voting, and online voting. The goal is to make it easier for people to vote and participate in our democracy. We should be looking for ways to expand voting options to accommodate all citizens, including senior citizens, parents with young children, college students, military members, rural voters, and persons with disabilities, all of which may have challenges when it comes to voting. With online voting, we could develop some kind of two-factor authentication system, or perhaps a system that could generate a unique voter ID code, but it would definitely have to be some kind of encrypted system to be able to maintain security. The more people that participate in voting, it will create a healthier democracy where people feel like their voice and their vote matters. Remember, the U.S. lags behind many other countries in voter turnout, and so increasing voter turnout will help us to create a sense of fairness and civility among citizens. Number 5, treat the Senate just like the House of Representatives. Base it on state population. Having 2 senators from each state doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it creates a situation where low population states are overrepresented and high population states are underrepresented. In high population states, Senate offices have to handle a larger caseload of constituents, which makes it more difficult for them to resolve problems in a timely fashion and meet the needs of a diverse voter population. Rural states, who have lower populations, get to hold a disproportionate amount of power against states several times their size. So this is an example of, you could say, the will of the few usurping the will of the many. And again, sounds very undemocratic to me. The way to fix this is to base the Senate representation on state population. So we could do something like having 1 senator per every, let's say, 100,000 people, 500,000 people, maybe even a million people, but some standardized proportion that will allow for truly equal representation across the states. And then each time there's a census every so many years, the number of federal senators from each state would get updated to represent changing population demographics. Okay, number 6, and this is an important one. Increase the number of political parties. Only having 2 real choices traps people into the 2-party dynamic of black and white, A or B, binary type thinking. The 2-party system forces people to pick a side or squeeze into a box that really isn't a good fit for them. It also encourages extremism and an all or nothing type mentality. Most of life happens in what you might call the gray zone. So why are we still operating our political system in an outdated black or white standard that forces people to accept something or someone that they really don't want? In order to fix this, I was thinking that we could come up with something like having 5 or 10 political parties so that no party has a majority and everyone has to be forced to work together and compromise. So, for example, if we created 5 parties, none of them would have more than 20% of the vote. If we had 10 parties, which I actually think is a better idea because it gives people even more choices, in that instance, no party would have more than 10% of the vote. And for those who say that this can't be done, this type of thing is already being done in other countries outside the US. So, for example, Denmark, Spain, or New Zealand, and there's others as well. But other people have figured out that, really shoving people into one of 2 boxes really isn't a good thing. It's not good for choice, it's not good for voters. There's a lot of downsides to the 2-party system. So increasing the number of political parties would definitely help to curb the level of dysfunction. Number 7, repeal Citizens United. If you recall, this was the 2010 Supreme Court case that opened the door to a flood of corporate spending into our political system. Because of Citizens United, corporations can essentially spend unlimited amounts of money on political candidates and super PACs. Corporations were viewed in the same light as ordinary people, and money became synonymous with speech. It's now 13 years later, and guess what? Corporations are not ordinary people, and money is still not speech. The problem that this Supreme Court decision brought about is that if you have more money, then your voice essentially matters more than others. This is inherently undemocratic and goes against the idea of one person, one vote. Overturning this decision would make elections less focused on money and more about the issues, which is exactly what matters and exactly what we need right now. Number 8, no more active stock trading for elected officials. Why should we care about this issue? Because allowing politicians to own and trade stocks encourages insider trading and personal profit, rather than actually focusing on doing the job, which is to serve the people. The new policy would still allow for payroll deductions into traditional retirement accounts like 401ks, 403bs, or IRAs, but no more active trading. The elected official will still be able to save money for retirement like any other American, but they wouldn't be able to own or trade stocks for the duration of their term, which is a good thing, because corruption is still a problem. Instituting this rule would encourage ethical behavior, keep the person focused on the core duties of the job, and instill trust in the public. At this point, I think that we can all agree money shouldn't be the core focus of politicians. Solving our societal problems should be. Number 9, tie politician pay to passing a budget. I like this one. If you, as a politician, cannot carry out a core duty and pass a federal budget each year, then why should you get paid? No budget equals no paycheck. Pretty simple idea. The problem we see is that not being able to pass a budget makes us rely on continuing resolutions, which ultimately leads to financial uncertainty further down the road. And this includes government shutdowns. Politicians need to sit down, negotiate, and actually compromise in order to do the job, instead of trying to score political points against opponents. Another idea is that besides withholding their paychecks, we could have them lose their health coverage. After all, if you're not doing your job and you're not getting paid, then you'll lose your health insurance just like any other American would. Anything wrong with that, Mr. Senator? If we change the incentives and attach real consequences, maybe our elected officials will actually start doing the basics of their job. Okay, you made it to the end of the video. And number 10, stronger ethics regulations that actually have consequences. And for this, I'm talking about real consequences, not just getting kicked off a committee or losing a leadership role. Without real consequences, ethics violations are like a slap on the wrist or a bite from a dog without teeth. Politicians just won't feel the full weight of their actions. Instead, we can have the person immediately lose their job, lose their health insurance, or lose any type of eligible pension, severance package, or government perks. In order to do this, we would need to hire more ethics office personnel to conduct investigations. If the politician committed a crime, they would obviously face fines or jail time, but what I'm talking about specifically is unethical, unprofessional conduct. So things like accepting free flights from corporate donors, participating in an insurrection, or lying to voters on television. Just think George Santos. If schools and businesses can have zero tolerance policies in place, then we can and should enforce something similar in the U.S. government. We have to have accountability. The goal is to encourage ethical behavior among elected officials, keep them focused on voter needs, and rebuild trust among the public. As I said, These were just a few of the things that came to mind. There are most definitely more than 10 changes that need to be implemented, but these are a good start. Accomplishing even one of these would create positive changes in our political system and help us to be less dysfunctional. It certainly won't be easy, but these reforms are necessary for ensuring a healthy democracy for future generations of Americans. Share these ideas with a friend, or better yet, actually share them with your elected officials. For the Eclectic Life, this is Sam signing out. Thank you so much for listening.